We're proud to present all the way from the sunny shores of California, the James Dean of Jazz, the Prince of Cool. And he's here playing a double bill with our very own Miles Davis and Dizzy Gillespie. Making his Birdland debut, Chet Baker and his quartet.
You want some advice, Baker? Go back home to the beach, man. Come back when you've lived a little. Hello, Fear.
Hello, Dad.
Hello, Dad.
All right, folks, that's a wrap.
I could have played myself, Chet.
You're not an actor.
Neither are you.
Well, that's true. Don't tell anyone. Why don't you come back with me to my place and we can sing?
That's not a good idea. I know about you.
You forget where you always Chet?
Stop!
No more jazz, junkie.
He's got severe trauma to the neck. He's lost all his front teeth.
28 years of practice gone. He'll never play again.
What did you do? You're gonna kill yourself because you can't play trumpet anymore?
Yes.
Forget about Birdland. All you need now is some time.
And you?
Hey, Junior. You trying to dry out again?
My funny Valentine, sweet comic Valentine, stay.
You come a long way, but
What?
it's not your playing that I'm worried about.
Miles said come back once you lived a little. I lived a little.
I want to play. All I want to do is play.
I want my life back.
I've always loved this man as an actor. When I met him, I called him an actor's actor. You know what I mean? But I've really fallen in love with Born to Be Blue. What a great movie. Congratulations to you both.
Thank you. Thanks.
I don't want to curse you, but Oscar nominated, man. Chet Baker, you guys could have taken any part of his life. So much of it is mysterious. Why'd you decide to focus on this part of his life? Either one of you can answer.
You want to take that?
I just think that focusing on a period that isn't the period that people know about, his famous period. I mean, he was the James Dean of Jazz, the Prince of Cool in the 50s. And that's fun, and you can look at the photographs, but it's not as interesting as a comeback story. And I thought the story of an artist who is trying to regain his music at a time when his music was dying in America was interesting. And we never had any intention of doing a traditional biopic, so finding a narrow frame was always in the DNA of the project. And so I designed it that way around those few years. And then this idea of Dino De Laurentiis approaching Chet to star as himself was kind of a really fun piece of information that I found in my research and brought into the story. We use that as a springboard to kind of do a reimagining and have a bit of fun.
Mm-hmm. That's a real fun part of it, actually, because you don't know when the movie that they're making begins and when the story starts. Very cool.
Well, for me, I like this period of his life because that's the age I'm at, and it makes me the right actor to play the part. So I really like that aspect of it. But I also think that when people are getting everything they want and everything's going great, the story's pretty much the same. You know, it's not that interesting. The rise to acclaims, there's some great music there, but as a story, it gets a lot more interesting in the middle of his life when the straight way gets lost. You know, I mean, we're finding him right at the middle where he's busted open, and this gift that he'd been given that he took for granted and had given him all this joy and everything was now being taken away. And it's this moment where he has to really ask himself what he's living for, and as a performer, it's a very exciting moment to get inside.
Mm-hmm. What about your jazz bona fide? Did you grow up as a jazzer? Did you know jazz growing up?
You know, no. My mom had, I think, 3 jazz albums. She had Miles Davis's Kind of Blue, Miles Davis's Birth of the Cool, and Miles Davis's Blue Moods. So that was what I knew, and I just thought that was jazz. And there is that feeling you have until it wakes up inside you. Jazz is a little bit like grown-ups talking in the other room. You don't like you know it's worthy of respect, but you're not sure what it is. And then something happens. For me, it was graduating high school, Let's Get Lost came out, Bruce Weber, around midnight. We talked a little bit about this before, around midnight. Thelonious Monk, Straight No Chaser, and Forrest Whitaker as Bird. You know, these movies really excited me about jazz and the world. I saw the world, and I saw the period and what was so seductive and interesting about it. And then the records came alive, you know?
And with Chet Baker, man, his life is, like I mentioned earlier, so mysterious. In the research, what did you find most interesting about Chet Baker and his life?
I guess what's kind of fascinating, there's so many legends around Chet Baker. I mean, things you hear that he pumped gas, right? I mean, it's a fascinating thing, like in the middle. So you tell me this jazz hero in the middle of his life was pumping gas, and he was working construction, and there's the fact that there's these middle years that this movie followed. That was the biggest mystery to me, reading all about these lost years and the album Blood, Chet, and Tears. Do you remember this album? You know, stuff he did. He was doing anything to stay alive, you know? And I found that kind of touching, to be honest with you, and interesting.
And working on his voice, how did you give us some technique on how you worked that? Because his voice is so unique. Vulnerable.
It's so unique, and I really couldn't get it, and I wanted to be careful of, if you get locked into an imitation, then you're not emotionally connecting to the material yourself. And the real dream is to kind of tip your hat to the iconography of it, the look a little bit and the sound a little bit, but to also bring a piece of yourself. So finding the voice for me was very important. There's something so fragile about it. You know, there's something about the way he sings and the way he talks that you feel like it's not to be a cliche, but it has that little bit of a candle flame that you're just not sure anything could put it out, but yet it stays lit. And that's what I went after for the voice thing.
Mm-hmm. And the singing too.
Yeah. Well, I had a great vocal coach with that, and Robert really believed in me with it. I at different times I wasn't sure how we should skin that cat. But you never really wanted to do it any other way, did you?
No, I mean, I never entertained the idea of using Chet Baker masters and trying to lip sync to that. It just doesn't seem right or consistent.
Well, then I would have to do an imitation of him speaking voice the whole movie too, or else it would be incongruous, and that would be weird. And I remember you using Joaquin Phoenix as a great example that, you know, he doesn't really sound like Johnny Cash in Walk the Line, but he embodies the mood and tone and experience of listening to Johnny Cash. And, you know, if you put the albums next to each other, there's no comparison. One's Johnny Cash and one is not. But in the movie, Walk the Line, I was very moved by Joaquin. And he got inside the music in a way. And that's what Robert challenged me to do.
And I think you did it. Now, for years, man, I've heard about Leonardo DiCaprio doing Chet Baker. I've heard other folks. So this has kicked around Hollywood for a minute. Is that right?
Yeah, I think a lot of different scripts and different versions. We all weren't chasing the same one, but I think a person like Chet, there's a certain mystique and a certain enigma which has attracted people over the years to his music and to his story. And so there was a lot of kind of competing and older Chet Baker projects. I just feel really lucky that we were able to bring this together and across the finish line, because often these movies are fragile things that stars have to align, and a lot of great stories never get told because those stars don't align. So it's really nice that we got across the finish line on this.
And it is true, too. You know, it's a little sad about, or I don't know what it says about us as a community or whatever, but that we do love to tell the stories of the people that set themselves on fire. And it's harder to get a movie made. Like if you were trying to make a movie about Dizzy Gillespie, a man who lived a long and pretty happy and
married for 40 years.
Yeah, he's kind of a great guy, a pillar of the community, helped people out. It's hard to make that story, you know, because he didn't play into any easy drama. You know, his life was a life of substantive, meaningful art and meaningful relationships, which are, funnily enough, less dramatic, You know, I mean, it's true. I mean, it's easy to make a movie about a divorce and really hard to make a movie about a happy marriage.
I agree. And Robert, what about you, jazz-wise? Growing up, you're from Toronto, which is a pretty jazzy city.
I'm from Toronto, but I grew up in a very small town called Ingersoll near London, Ontario. So
tell them what it's famous for.
It's famous for the big cheese. It's an agricultural town. So, but as a kid, I always, from a very young age, used to sneak out to the local repertory theater in London and see foreign films and see films like Raging Bull, which kind of like just completely changed my view of the world. And I think I came to jazz through Bob Dylan. For whatever reason, at a very young age, I became a Bob Dylan obsessive, and I learned about, you know, country, folk, blues, jazz from the 20s through the 50s, all kind of through Dylan, and then got into all those people. And, you know, the very first film I did out of film school was a 1940s jazz narrative. And so I think jazz is very cinematic, especially that period, because of the crossover with film noir and the black and white photography. And so I've always loved film noir. So there was something, even from a very early stage of my career, about that era in jazz that I wanted to express cinematically.
It's so deeply American, you know, jazz. I mean, it touches so strongly on issues of race and issues that that speak directly to our country.
Yes.
And there's a geometry to sound that all the rest of music is really based on. All the best hip hop is based on this geometry. It's holding us and supporting us. And one of the things that was fascinating is, as I was reading about Chet Baker and reading about his influences, you know, so I'd be like, okay, well, why did he love Charlie Parker? What's the difference between Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie? What's the difference between Miles Davis and, you know, what is all this? And you start to see this incredible musicianship. You can't believe that these guys were playing popular music. Because, I mean, when you look at the writing of Porgy and Bess and you look at, you know, what they're doing with it's incredible, you know? Mm-hmm. It's so powerful. And I kind of, then you start to see it underneath everything. You know, underneath everything we're doing, all the great music, you see pieces of it pop up.
It's America's indigenous music.
It is.
Absolutely. Did you talk to anybody who knew Chet Baker? You talked to folks?
I did. I got a couple great opportunities. One time, and I couldn't help it. I was in a restaurant, and Elvis Costello was, remember I called you after this was over, and Elvis Costello was sitting across, and I was like, all right, I have to do it, because I knew that Elvis had thrown a rope to Chet at kind of these middle year periods of offering him to play on one of his albums, Beyond Belief, wasn't it? And so I went up and asked him what it was. I told him I was going to be playing Chet Baker and what do you know about him. And he told a very, very funny story about, I'll try to tell it quickly, but about that he got really lucky. He invited Chet in to play, and he had Van Morrison there that day, and he had the three of them, you know, the three of them were singing in his recording studio. He's like, this is magic, man. But I thought this was really indicative of who Chet is. It was a key to his character. He said, he asked them what they wanted to play, and Van Morrison said, let's play Send in the Clowns. And Chet was just kind of sitting and goes, oh, that's a little corny, isn't it? And Van said, no, it's going to be great, and we'll do it like this, and we'll do it in C, and you get it, and the trumpet's going to come in, and it's going to sound great. And Elvis was like, okay, sure. And Chet was like, hey, where's the head? And he's, you know, Elvis pointed to the bathroom, and he walked, and he never came back. It's like, I said the song was corny, and it's out. No more conversation, right? You know? But I thought that was a key indication. I got to meet Herbie Hancock, who told me about an amazing time being, I can't remember if it was London or Paris. He saw him late night in some little club, and said he played really well on like 2 songs, but like really well. You know, that's what Herbie said. And then it would leave him. You know, something happened, it would be going. So he went up to Chet. He said, hey, I'm Herbie Hancock, and would you come in? And we're recording here. You want to come in and play? And Chet said, yeah, definitely. You know, and he said, let's just noon tomorrow. Good? Yeah, noon's great. So Chet arrived promptly at noon, 4 days late. Right? Right? And as Herbie Hancock told the story to me, anyway, he said they had been recording in there. Everybody was exhausted. They were actually walking out of the studio when Chet walked in. And he told all the musicians, get back in there. It's Chet Baker's showing up. We're going to play with him. We're going to record him. And that's when he realized that he handed out the sheet music, and everybody else knew the song because they'd been playing it for 4 days. And they said, well, Chet, here, why don't you take a look at it, and then we can all play it. And Chet was like, why don't you guys all play it once, and I'll listen in. And Herbie realized, oh, right, this guy still can't read music. Here, he's been through all this. He's been in the heyday of bebop and resurrected himself, and he still can't read a note. And that he said after they played the song for Chet one time, and the next time around he played it with more nuance and intimacy than any of them had done in the last 4 days after hearing it one time.
Wow.
Just right by ear.
Wow, that is a great story.
Yeah.
You also told me a great story about Let's Get Lost, which is a Chet Baker biography that you saw as a young man. But you told me that everything in there wasn't necessarily above board. Okay.
Well, I'm not saying it. I love that film, and I know Bruce Weber, and it's very. I think it's essential jazz cinema. If you want to watch it, I love that movie. But it was funny talking to people that knew Chet, how even documentaries can lie because. They were saying, that's not Chet. The Chet in that movie's not the Chet that was my friend. I'm like, well, what do you mean? I mean, that's him. That's him talking. Like, yeah, but he called me right after he did that interview and told I played that sucker. That sucker paid me $100. And he would do whatever he was always on the make.
Yeah, always whatever he could do to score.
To score, exactly.
Yeah. Again, man, it is such a great movie, and to see you embody him, and I learned so much about other things like Richard Bach. Richard Bach is a character in the movie, and in the jazz world, he's famous for a record company called Pacific Jazz, which was like the essential West Coast jazz label. He also discovered the Jazz Crusaders. But man, in the movie, get a whole different idea of Dick Bock, Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, Dick Bock is played by Callum Keith Rennie, great Canadian actor. And there's actually, even though he was a really important figure in West Coast jazz, particularly with Mulligan and Chet Baker, there's not a ton of material available on him because when doing a movie like this, even though it was a reimagining, I spent months and months researching all the various characters, and there was a limited amount of material available on Dick Bock, apart from the work that he produced. And so when working with Callum, we had to take the little pieces that we had and what we knew and kind of invent. And it's funny because I actually just heard yesterday or the day before that Dick Bock's son came to a screening, and I didn't even know he had a son. I didn't even exactly know what kind of kids he had, and he was really, really touched by Callum's performance and the nuance that Callum brought. And I think, when you talk to Callum about that, because he didn't have a lot of research to go on, he also just, like a lot of great actors do, they just tapped into their own personal reservoir and like what it's like to be a manager, what it's like to be non-judgmental, and I think Callum did a really great job of kind of portraying that kind of mentorly, brotherly manager relationship.
He did.
And it's it's ironic that he's the one with Chet at the end in the dressing room, like that. There's something about that kind of bromance of it all that. I've always loved those kinds of relationships. Like a film like Raging Bull, which is just more of an inspirational guiding light that we had. There's a similar relationship with Jake LaMotta and his brother, and that is kind of his manager and his brother figure. And
but it's you bring up a really good point about these musicians get a lot of credit, and without people like Dick Bock, without people putting in the hard work to create these labels and get this music out there and get it down, with a lot of troubled souls. I mean, it's a lot of work these guys did, and that is what Dick Bock's kids were saying. Is just that what Callum really got was the love that their father wasn't interested in the music. It wasn't a job. He loved it. It's kind of like Sam Phillips, driving around out and trying to get that blues music down. He didn't do it for civil rights. He didn't do it to be a good person. He did it because he loved it.
Yeah. And obviously you're a jazz lover. I mean, that comes through in our conversations. And there's been a lot of actors who've played trumpet on screen. The list is long, including your training day buddy, Denzel Washington, who played a trumpeter in Mo Better Blues.
I think he did it best. I'll still hats off. I told him, I didn't, because I knew that he does what he does so well. I hope that he sees it and likes it, but I learned a lot. I watched Mo Better Blues whenever I would lose heart a little bit about how hard this would be, because I know that Denzel doesn't play the trumpet, and when you watch Mo Better Blues, his relationship to the instrument, it's like a baseball player with his glove. I mean, he just, and that's what's so important. You just got to get that love and that intimacy with it. And, you know, Denzel, everything he does with tenacity and for perfection, you know, and so it was just an inspiration to me. But Mo Better has definitely got some of the best jazz playing, trumpet playing, and some of the best backstage scenes. We used that. That was one of our bars. It's like, could we have some backstage scenes that are as good as the ones in Mo Better?
What about the fingering and all that? Was that important to you or Robert to make sure the fingering looked great so that 5% of jazz musicians who wanted to get on your case?
You want to be able to let the audience lose themselves in the movie. And if it's wrong, actively wrong, they can't lose themselves in the movie. They want to believe you, you know, they want to give over to it. And if you're in the way, they won't be able to. So in a lot of ways, it's about getting out of the way. And Robert challenged me. We did the best we could. And it's a hard thing to do, but we'd started with one song, and I would learn My Funny Valentine, and we'd play it, and then we go with Summertime, and then you go with, you know, Over the Rainbow, and I've Never Been in Love Before. I mean, it was hard. You know, it was hard.
To play trumpet is hard.
It was hardest for Carmen Ejogo, my co-star, because we had a dressing room right next to each other, and so all 12 hours a day we're shooting, and any break, there I am. And then we drive home, and we're in the middle of nowhere. Robert told me we were shooting in Toronto. It wasn't Toronto, okay? It was like 2 hours into the desert north of Toronto. And so we get back to the hotel room, you know, which is like this lousy Ramada Inn off a highway, you know, with walls that are paper thin. Carmen's still, she's down the hall, right? But she gets in, she can't even watch television because all she hears is, you know, it sounds like me killing porpoises out there.
But you got a great musician from Toronto to play the trumpet parts, Kevin Turcotte, right?
Yeah, so Kevin Turcotte he does all of Chet's trumpet, but he also does Miles and Dizzy on the one tune at Birdland. He did a great job, and then David Braid was our pianist and our arranger-composer, and he's the guy that I worked on that short film that I did right out of film school. And so I had a good relationship with David, and he helped me assemble the group in Canada. And then two of the guys, the bassist Steve Wallace and the drummer Terry Clark, both are guys who played with Chet.
Oh yeah,
in the
Terry
80s.
Clark is a legend in Toronto.
Yeah, and so it was kind of nice to have a few guys in the band that had stories about Chet, that knew the way Chet played, and it was a lot of fun.
They shared those stories?
Yeah, they shared a bunch of stories, and they all had a similar theme of how difficult it was.
They all say some version of the same thing.
How magical he could be, but how, you know, he often wouldn't show up, and how tricky he was. But at the end of the day, they all thought he was a genius when he's on in those moments. And they are fleeting, stolen moments, but when you get those, it's magic.
It's a magic movie. I love the last line in the movie. Remember the last line?
Which one?
The very last line. You introduce the song, you say,
Born to be Blue.
Born to be Blue. It's a great movie, ladies and gentlemen. There's so much I could still ask about the Miles Davis role. We can go on, but let the audience ask some questions.
Ethan, I'm a huge fan. You've been in some mind-numbingly good movies. If you had to choose one world where you had to live in, like, of your movie and in and as your character as well, what movie and what character would that be?
That's a great question, Ethan.
I have to admit that what's jumping to mind is some of the better love scenes I've ever done. Do you know, like, if I could live in that haze forever. Yeah, there's some leading ladies that were quite impressive.
So you wouldn't be that cop in Training Day?
You know, that one passed through my mind and kept going. Yeah. I want to stay out of getting, you know, beaten up by a gang. You know, I don't need that. Thank you, though. Thank you.
Another question?
Thank you for being here. I have a question for Ethan. I have read this book last year, so I want to know where you got your inspiration when you wrote this book, because it's like a children's Bible, something.
Oh, what's the name of the book?
The book is called, she's talking about a book called Rules for a Night. Yeah, and it's a book I wrote for young people that came out last year. And it's a little story I started weaving together out of classic parables drawn, you know, I mean, some of them are Eastern philosophy, some of them are Native American, some are African stories. I've just pulled, you know, parables from great philosophical minds, and I pulled them together kind of for my kids and made up a story of a father telling them to his kids. And I gave it away as a Christmas present for all our family and friends. You know, and we got a really great response from it. And so my wife did all the illustrations and helped me with it. And so we published it last year, and I'm glad that you liked it.
How many books have you written?
I've written 3, but I have a new one coming out next year that's really cool. It's called Inde. It's about the story of Geronimo. It's a graphic novel, and with the artist Greg Ruth. And I'm just super, super proud of it. It's something I've been working on for a long time, and so hopefully that'll be cool. Has nothing to do with jazz. Maybe.
Oh, you know, speaking of that, though, you did hint that to me that there's more Chet Baker stories in your head.
Oh, I think so. I mean, that's the thing about Chet. I remember I would be reading and talking things and coming to talk to you on set and go, what about, gosh, is there any place for this idea? And I'm like, oh, that's another movie. You know, I mean, there's so many great stories, and, you know, we could trade stories about what different people told about Chet. Really, every night was kind of interesting. Yeah, there's so many cool aspects of his life.
Any more questions?
Hey, Ethan, I'm a big fan of your work. Based on this trailer, it definitely looks great. I can't wait to see it. So my question to you is, what was the most interesting thing you learned about Chet Baker?
The most interesting thing I learned, I think I didn't understand really. You hear the legend and stuff. I didn't understand what it really meant when he lost his teeth. I don't think I understood how painful that would be. It's almost unimaginable, really. It's like, you know, it's like breaking a great baseball player's kneecaps or something at the height of their powers, you know. I mean, and the idea that he could work so hard to recover from that kind of setback, and that he even wanted to, because there's a weird thing about drug abuse that you think that it means they don't care about life somehow. I remember I had a friend who passed away, who OD'd on heroin, and everybody would say, but he was a vegetarian.
Wow.
Like, they somehow equate, like, because he took care of himself or thought about other things, that he wouldn't hurt himself in other aspects. And it shows how much we don't really understand about people's relationship to their own self-medication, you know? And I think that I thought because he was a drug addict that he didn't really care. But he cared immensely. I mean, the only time he really got sober in his life was to relearn the trumpet. You know, it says something there's such a duality to that kind of person. I just found it hypnotizing.
I have to add, those scenes where you were trying to play again after losing his teeth, they're hard to watch, man. They're harrowing. I mean, I could feel your pain almost.
Yeah.
You know, and I tell you what I learned about Chet Baker. I didn't know he had such a thing for black women.
Huh? Doesn't everybody with a brain?
But it's really obvious, yeah. Another question?
Hey guys, thanks for being here. To that point about the power of music, I just wanted to recall the scene from Boyhood, Ethan, where your character creates the Black Album for Mason, and I heard that was kind of a real thing you did in real life for your daughter, which is great. So this analogy doesn't really hold water, but bear with me. So if you could take a few of Chet's songs from different periods in his life and compile them into one album to kind of reflect or symbolize a transgression of time, what would they be? Just a few of them.
Okay, I'd start with some of the stuff with Jerry Mulligan. Maybe there's a great live recording of them doing The Lady's a Tramp. You ever heard that? It's so funny. It's got such wit. It's so breezy. It kind of captures that whole spirit. I would do Chet in Paris, which is Chet trying to be Miles. I mean, it's in a lot of ways his best jazz album. It's original music, not that he wrote, but that was original at that moment. He was really trying to put, it wasn't just doing standards. He only sings one song. It's a really nice, he didn't sing too much and he did not sing. It's a beautiful, beautiful album with Dick Chartzik, who's a great pianist, and that's a high watermark. And I would close it out with his Almost Blue, live in Tokyo, Elvis Costello song. That's just a miracle. If you kind of listen to those, that would give you the holy trinity that holds up an immense amount of brilliant work.
Speaking of tape lists, as kind of a crew gift on the film, Ethan actually put together a much, much larger compilation for all of us of all the stuff that, because you have to listen to a lot of other music to appreciate Chet. And so I think myself and for Ethan, it was a chance to get into all kinds of other music that then influenced Chet. And so Ethan put together this great 100-song set list of stuff that inspired him.
It was really
sweet.
It was all the music I put together to prep for the role, because you can't try to play Chet Baker and not know Birth of the Cool. You've got to know who is Bix. If Charlie Parker's going to say he's Bixified, well, you got to know who Bix is, and you got to know, well, what made Billie Holiday significant. We do a great. One of the pieces I love in the movie is they do Chet playing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which is really beautiful. But Ben Webster really did that better than anybody else, and so you kind of need to know what we're referencing, and there's so much beautiful, beautiful jazz, and there's contemporary jazz. Brad Meldau is one of my favorite musicians right now, and his music is tremendous.
Wow. Robert Budreau, everybody. Ethan Hawke, soon to be Oscar nominated.
Ethan Hawke. You keep saying it till it happens.
Yeah. Thank you.